Good evening, welcome to the Parents Information Evening for the Blackpool trip. New York and Washington trip. I had a wee panic faces there. What we're going to go through this evening basically is taking you through the whole reason why we've organised this trip to New York and Washington, and also to discuss obviously the most important thing, the payment. The trip to New York and Washington will take place on the 16th of June 2014 until the 24th of June 2014. So it's a 9-day trip with 7 days overnight in New York and Washington. The way it's split is 4 days overnights in New York and 3 overnights in Washington. A wee bit bored earlier on and played about with PowerPoint. Obviously we're going to New York and Washington. I've got that by now. So what is New York like? For anyone who hasn't been to New York, it really is an incredible city and does live up to its name. Incredibly busy, a lot of hustle and bustle, but more probably of what really kind of truly makes America packed into a small 24 square mile island than the rest of America. It's got everything in it, and truly it is the city that never sleeps. But we will, rest assured, we will put your son and daughter to sleep eventually, sometime during the New York visit, but we have got a lot of stuff packed into our itinerary. Some of the things that we've already kind of organised: the Statue of Liberty cruise, which takes you out to the actual Statue of Liberty. You get admission to the Statue of Liberty itself. You can climb up the top of the Statue of Liberty. The Empire State Building, the Rockefeller Center. Both the Empire State Building and the Rockefeller Center offer excellent views out across Manhattan, excellent views of Central Park, the Chrysler Building, other major locations in New York. The Empire State Building entrance will go up to the observation floor of the Empire State Building. We'll do that at night time. The views are fantastic at night time. The Rockefeller Center will go right up to the very top. The observation deck is on the very top of the Rockefeller Center building. You go right up to the roof, and we'll do that during the day. That's the best views. Obviously, being a modern studies trip, we will visit the Memorial Centre for the World Trade Center. Recently opened a moving memorial to the terrorist attacks that happened in 9/11. Pupils will get the chance to walk around the monument, to talk to policemen and firefighters who were actually involved on that day and helped out at the trade centres, and have obviously some incredible and truly heartbreaking stories to tell. Ellis Island Immigration Museum, and that's on the same day as the Statue of Liberty visit. We'll go to Ellis Island. We'll see where immigrants to the USA were sorted and processed. We will go around the United Nations, tour around the United Nations. NBC Studio Tour, where they film such shows as Saturday Night Live, 30 Rock, NBC News. We'll get a tour around the NBC Studio Complex, a behind-the-scenes tour, and hopefully get to be introduced to a couple of the stars of the big shows. Normally they arrange for at least one star to kind of be floating through us during the tour. A TV and movie locations tour, which will be via a coach, but you'll be taking around basically some of the major locations that have been used in films and TV over the last 20 to 25 years. Highlights include seeing the Friends apartment building, the Ghostbusters garage, to name but a few, of many Sex and the City locations as well that are filmed round about. And of course shopping. I've got an arm twisted up my back that as there's 2 female members of staff and a lot of female interest, that they have to go shopping, and so there will obviously be some time to visit some of the shops in New York. So what sort of objectives then? It's not just a holiday to New York. We actually have sat down and we've thought about how this meets some of our objectives, some of the curricular content that your son and daughter has been covering in modern studies, be it 3rd year, 4th year, or in 5th year. So obviously, a big part of why we're in New York is the 9/11, the impact that 9/11 had not just on New York and America, but on world politics. So we'll visit Ground Zero to see the National Memorial. As I said earlier, we'll also get a chance to speak to New Yorkers who were there, firefighters, policemen, to just make that kind of real life. We learn about 9/11, we learn about the impact 9/11 had in the school, but we're going to put it into a real life context. We're going to speak to people who were actually there. Reflect on world politics and the impact that 9/11 has had. See global politics in action. Right? The United Nations headquarters being based in New York, we get to see every country in the United Nations taking part in debating. We get a tour around the United Nations building, an excellent opportunity to see global politics. One of the big things that many of the 5th year pupils who are doing higher modern studies will recognise is this phrase of a melting pot in America of many different races and ethnic groups that form the backbone of America, and part of that has been Ellis Island, and the history of Ellis Island, the immigration of many Scottish, Irish, but people from all around the world into New York and then eventually spreading out across America. So by visiting Ellis Island, we get again another real life context of that melting pot. And finally, we get to see, particularly the 3rd year course, we've been talking a lot about the power of the media. Particularly the control of television and newspapers. We're going to get to see that in action at NBC. Some of the other, I'm not going to go through them all, but some of the other kind of cross-curricular benefits to visiting New York, just to pick out a couple. We can appreciate the technological impact that buildings such as Empire State Building had on the world. One of the kind of first modern skyscrapers, formerly the tallest building in the world. We can also see, even just by going shopping, that it's not just always a case of just going shopping. You actually get to see the advertising and the marketing techniques of a company like Macy's, the world's biggest department store. You get to see how they advertise and how they try and convince, how they use consumer techniques to try and convince people to buy their products. We get to see that up close as well. Okay, I'll discuss the actual itinerary in a second, but what is Washington DC like? Washington DC will be a complete change in atmosphere for the pupils. If your son or daughter goes on this trip, it will be a complete change from New York. New York, they will be shattered when they go to bed at night. They will be absolutely shattered. It's hustle and bustle, there's hardly any space, and it is just hectic. Thoroughly enjoyable, but hectic. Washington is a little bit more mellow, a little bit more relaxed. Plenty still to see, lots to do. They still will be shattered going to bed, but not quite as hustle and bustle, not quite as rushed. So obviously we'll be going to see the White House, Capitol Hill, Congress Building, the picture in the slide there, the Lincoln Memorial, the Washington Monument, Arlington Cemetery, obviously home to JFK's grave and the everlasting flame. Maybe one or two, definitely one, but maybe possibly two of the Smithsonian museums, which are huge and cover every different topic, from air and space to natural history, lots for the pupils to see and do when they're there. And the kind of various war memorials. Now, the good thing about Washington is that pretty much everything that I've just listed up on the board is free to enter. They're all publicly owned attractions that doesn't cost a penny to enter. So everything we're going to see in Washington is essentially free. And just some of the modern studies objectives for our Washington trip. We're obviously going to visit the centre of the US politics. We're going to gain a first-hand experience of the relationship between the President and Congress, something that we study at various different levels. We're going to understand the great technological advances that America's made in the last 2 decades. For example, the Air and Space Museum and the Smithsonian show us a replica size 747, one of the first Apollo capsules that went into space, that you can climb inside, get a chance to play about with, all that sort of thing. And the importance of the President. Obviously we'll be going to visit the White House and Arlington Cemetery, so we'll get an idea of the current President Obama and speak a little bit about JFK and the impact that JFK had. The school has decided, or the department has decided to go with the travel company STS. The process of organising this trip, I contacted several tour companies and spoke to many teachers who'd organised similar trips, and STS, it was a name that kept coming up both for value and for professionalism, and eventually they ended up having the best value for money quote. As you can see, they've obviously had the experience of 75 years, and obviously one of the good things, which can be a bit of a concern if you go with a tour company that doesn't have this, they are at all and are protected, which means that if anything was to happen out with your control, that money is protected. Alright. Okay, so possibly the part that many people have been speaking about for the last couple of weeks or so. How are we going to select the pupils who are going? First and foremost, there are 40 places on the tour, 40 places with 4 teachers, 4 members of staff accompanying, so it makes a total group size of 44, 40 spaces for the pupils. Now, as this is a modern studies trip, and I'm well aware that the parents here this evening whose son or daughter doesn't do modern studies, it doesn't preclude them from going on the trip, but certainly the priority has to be given to modern studies pupils. It is a modern studies trip, and our objectives and our aims are very much geared towards modern studies, so we have to give priority to modern studies pupils. I've had in the return from yourselves and other parents more pupils who do modern studies wanting to go than we have places for. So we have over 40 modern studies pupils who have indicated that they wish to go on this trip. The fairest way, and we spoke as a department, but pretty much the fairest way that we can do it is to draw names out of a hat, basically, on Wednesday morning. The reason why we're doing it Wednesday morning is we wanted to have a parents' evening this evening to talk to you a little bit about what the trip would involve and obviously the cost. So it gives you an opportunity to think over it the next couple of days, and obviously if you wish your child to be withdrawn from interest for the trip, and you can let us know. The 40 that are selected will receive a first deposit letter with instructions on how to pay and when to pay the first deposit that will secure their place on the trip. All other pupils who aren't selected, including those pupils who aren't modern studies pupils, will be put onto a reserve list. Slightly complicated in the reserve list in that, because of the way that the room allocation will work, it might be that if a boy drops out, that there has to be a boy who takes his place, and likewise if a girl drops out, a girl has to take a place. So we're not going to number the reserve list in any way. Again, that will be done randomly. But it might have to be that it might just be a boy who takes the place if it's a boy who drops out. That's going to be about that in a second. But again, because this is a modern studies trip, priority has to be given to modern studies pupils. So the reserve list primarily will, the priority will be given to modern studies pupils. Okay, the cost of the trip. Now, I put an approximate cost on the very first letter that I sent out to yourselves. An approximate cost of £1,300, and I'm sure a few of you were cursing whoever Mr McGilchrist was when that letter came home that night. It is a lot of money, and I'm not going to lie, I don't think that if this sort of trip was arranged when I was at school, I definitely don't think that I would have been able to afford to go on it. However, considering what we've managed to get for that £1,300, it's actually quite a good deal. And to put it into context, one of the quotes that I received from a well-known travel company who are just as big as STS, they were looking for £2,450 per pupil for the similar trip with similar specs. Okay, so for that 1,300, what does that include? Direct flights from Glasgow. This isn't flying to Schiphol to then fly back to New York, to then fly back from New York to Schiphol to Glasgow. This is direct flights from Glasgow to New York. 7 nights bed and breakfast accommodation, so the breakfast is included with the hotel, so 7 nights bed and breakfast and a 3-star accommodation. Also, because this is America, most hotel rooms in America are two double beds in the one room. To prevent the cost of the trip doubling, it would mean that it would be 4 pupils to a room, essentially, with 2 double beds, so there would be a bed share involved with this trip. Unfortunately, and I did inquire about whether twin rooms could be organised, it does double the cost of the trip. America is just known in America that hotel rooms, majority of hotel rooms, probably 95% of hotel rooms, are 2 double beds in each room. Okay, so it is a bed share, so it would be 4 pupils to each room, so 4 boys and 4 girls sharing 2 double beds. Okay. The 7 evening meals in chain restaurants, which Miss McQuillan was adamant that I made sure that I talked this one up. The chain restaurants is not 7 evening meals in a hotel. The chain restaurants are restaurants like Hard Rock Cafe, Planet Hollywood, and the Forrest Gump themed restaurant Bubba Gump Shrimp. These are all restaurants that are in the centre in Times Square, big famous restaurants, really exciting places to go to. These are all included in the cost of the quote. All the excursions that I've just spoke about, every single excursion is paid for through this £1,300. All the excursions are paid for. There's not one single excursion that we will go on in the trip that isn't paid for through this quote. The transfer from New York, we'll spend 4 days in New York, then we'll get a coach transfer from New York down to Washington. As part of that, we will stop in Philadelphia for 2 hours. I'm really hoping that we get run up the stairs like Rocky, but we'll need to wait and see. But we get 2 hours. We get 2 hours in Philadelphia. We get to see a couple of the sites in Philadelphia on our way down to Washington. So that's all included. The travel insurance, you don't have to sort out individual travel insurance for your son or daughter. That's all comprehensive travel insurance is included. And all the local taxis that are included also into that. The costs that are not included in the trip are very minimal, to be honest. This more or less, I would view this as an all-inclusive price. One thing that's not included is money for tips. Tipping is a custom in the USA. Most restaurants add it on without asking, and normally it's about 10 to 15% of your overall bill. And tipping the likes of coach drivers, tour guides is all expected. I wouldn't expect that to be very much when you factor in that we've got a big group. And that's something that we can talk about nearer to the time, but you're not talking a lot of money with that. Everyone now who enters the USA must have an electronic visa that they apply for. It's called an ESTA, which is an electronic system for travel authorization. That it costs $14 per pupil, which roughly is £9 per pupil. Everyone has to have that. You have to have it as a mandatory document to get access to the United States. Any lunch meals that we get, I don't anticipate very often stopping for lunch. Certainly not in any restaurants. The pupils will get a breakfast, and by breakfast it is not a roll and square sausage at the shop. It is a massive buffet, American style breakfast. They don't become the fattest nation on earth for nothing. It is huge. You can get as much bacon as you've ever wanted in your life, pancakes. You know, I'm going to encourage pupils who go to really fill up in breakfast time, because we'll be doing a lot of walking during the day, we'll be seeing a lot of things, we simply won't have the time to consider lunch, and it's amazing how quickly before it's suddenly time for dinner. So I don't really anticipate lunch being a big concern, or having much money for lunch. Certainly some money to maybe buy a hot dog off a vendor as we're walking down the street, that sort of thing, you're talking $1. And obviously, as many people have been speaking about the last few weeks, about wanting to buy a lot of clothing, spending money to go into the shops, but certainly we're going to actively encourage that a limit, we might possibly actively encourage a limit on the amount of spending that's done, obviously, because we don't want pupils to put themselves in a situation where they're buying a lot of merchandise, a lot of products, and then it gets lost or stolen, etc. Okay, the actual payment itself. The 40 that are selected on Wednesday morning through a random draw will be notified, and will be asked to pay an initial deposit of £150. The initial deposit is £150. The deposit cut-off date will be the Wednesday the 17th of April. That is a cut-off date for that. That gives me enough time to get in contact with the tour company to secure our 40 places on the trip. Payment really has got to be made on or before that date in order to secure a place. Because the demand is so high, because we have that reserve list there, we really need to try to get the payment either on or before that date. Once pupils submit their first deposit, they will be issued with an STS savings card that both myself and yourself will be 2 copies of it, we'll keep. And it looks something like this. Obviously a space for name, what year they're in, and whoever's in charge of taking the money from the pupils. Most likely will be Mrs. Ballantyne, who will be handling the collecting in of money. What I've put up on the board is a proposed payment schedule that will get us paid up in time. We'll have to pay 12 weeks prior to departure, but it will also give you enough time to start thinking about saving up some spending money. Obviously, again, I know it's a huge amount of money. I've got it as cheap as I possibly can. For what we're getting, you know, it is a good value for money trip when you work out everything. But it is a lot of money, it is a big outgoing, and it's something you need to think. Obviously, you've probably thought long and hard about it, but this gives you some idea of the financial outgoings per month that you would be committed to. So that first deposit, that payment one, the initial deposit that's due for the 17th of April, is £150, and that reduces our balance down to £1,150. Then what we have is a couple of consecutive monthly payments of £150. In June 2013, you'll see that it says a second deposit, payment 3, second deposit. All that is a payment to STS, the travel company, to actually book the flights. Round about that time is when we can actually properly confirm the flights. The good thing about STS is that they overestimate the cost of things like flights. Accommodation, you know the price of. Flights, they overestimate, so it's never going to be more expensive. As a rule, obviously, it's never going to be any more than what we've already kind of spoken about. So that second deposit in June 2013, that will basically book the flights, and by that point you'll have paid £450 and be left with £850 remaining. Obviously we'll have the summer holidays, then we come back in August, and again another series of £150 consecutive payments begins. Because I'm really a nice guy and I'm good to you, I've obviously made December's payment a little bit cheaper by £50. And I've thought that we'll do no payment in January in order. Obviously, it's a really difficult time of year, and we'll resume the £150 in February, which, if all goes to plan, in February 2014, the whole trip would be paid off, and that would give you about 3 to 4 months to consider spending money and anything, any other sort of issues you want to think about before then. Okay, so I've bored you nearly long enough, so just what kind of happens next after tonight? The pupils that are selected at random on Wednesday morning, so basically every pupil who has handed me back in a letter that they wish to be considered for the trip, every pupil will be entered into a draw. The priority will go to the modern studies, so the first 40 places, or the 40 places, will be filled by modern studies pupils. Those 40 pupils who are selected will be notified on Wednesday, and they will be given a first deposit letter, along with a copy of the payment schedule that you just saw on the board there. Pupils are asked to return with £150 as soon as possible, basically, on or before the date of the 17th of April, which is the cut-off date for the first deposit. Basically, I know you might be coming in here tonight in two minds about whether that's something that you feel that you want your son or daughter to go to or commit to. You might have second thoughts after seeing the kind of payment schedule laid out like that. All I would ask is if you've kind of changed your mind about whether you wish your son or daughter to be considered, if you just let me know so I can take their name out of the consideration and allow someone else who does still want to go to be considered. Basically, that's kind of my spiel for this evening. The presentation, you might notice, has been filmed on the camcorder down the front. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the presentation onto the Modern Studies website, and I'll share it with certainly parents who weren't here this evening. But feel free to go back on if you have any kind of queries about what I've said. You can revisit it and look over it again. But I mean, at this point, I would invite it if there's any questions. Certainly, myself, Miss McQuillan and Mrs Ballantyne, who are at the side there, will be happy to answer questions about the trip. I have all the answers. As a teacher, I just usually tell kids to Google it. But certainly, if I don't have the answer for you this evening, I will certainly get it by tomorrow. Is there any questions that anyone's kind of thinking about? Why is it so expensive? Okay. Well, thank you very much for coming. As I say, if your son or daughter is selected, they'll be notified on Wednesday, and unfortunately, if they're not selected, they will be put on the reserve list and kept up to date with the developments. The important date, if your child is selected, is the 17th of April. That's the cut-off date for the first deposits to be in. So, thank you very much for coming this evening, and if you've got any questions, if you come and see myself, Mrs McQuillan and Mrs Ballantyne. Thank you very much.